Okay, so when you hear the name James Monroe, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For most of us, it's a famous doctrine about foreign policy, right? But what if I told you that behind that famous political stance, the story of the last founding father to be president is hiding a much bigger, way more surprising legacy? One that has a lot more to do with the nation's wallet than with its borders.
Yep, this is the line. This is what defines him in the history books. It's a bold, powerful declaration, telling Europe to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. It's famous. And, as it turns out, it's really only half the story.
Because at the exact same time Monroe was drawing these new lines on the world map, he was also navigating a hidden crisis, a massive financial storm that was threatening to sink the young American nation before it ever really got the chance to set sail.
So, to really understand this hidden legacy, let's start with the version of President Monroe we all learned about back in school.
He came into office during what's called the era of good feelings. Sounds nice, right? The Federalist Party had basically collapsed, the bitter partisan fighting had cooled way down, and on the surface, the country seemed more unified than it had ever been.
And his textbook highlight reel is packed. You know the drill. Settling the intense slavery debate with the Missouri Compromise, acquiring Florida from Spain, and of course, that famous doctrine. It paints a picture of a solid, successful president, but it's an incomplete picture.
Because right under that calm surface of good feelings, a perfect economic storm was gathering some serious force.
When Monroe first took office, this was the number that truly mattered. The War of 1812 had left the United States with a truly staggering national debt. For a young nation, this figure was absolutely astronomical.
And just look how fast it happened. In only 4 years, the national debt nearly tripled. This wasn't just some line item in a budget. This was a genuine existential threat to the entire country's credit and stability.
And on top of all that debt, the financial system itself was, well, it was pure chaos. You had all these state banks just printing their own money with very little oversight, which led to runaway inflation and a flood of counterfeit bills. The nation was literally one financial shock away from complete collapse.
And in 1819, that shock arrived. Suddenly, Monroe was facing America's first major depression, and the decisions he was about to make would define his presidency in ways that few of us remember today.
Now, this wasn't just a downturn. It was a full-blown panic. It was the first time the country really experienced the brutal side of market capitalism. And honestly, nobody had a playbook for how to respond.
The dominoes just fell with terrifying speed. First, the price of cotton, which was America's biggest export, completely plummeted on the global market. That caused credit to just dry up overnight. Then the speculative bubble in Western lands burst. And finally, banks started to fail, one after another, taking people's life savings with them.
The pressure on Monroe was immense. The public was demanding immediate action, print more money, forgive people's debts, issue a federal bailout. But Monroe made a deeply, deeply unpopular choice. He resisted, refusing to go for these short-term fixes that he believed would destroy the nation's long-term credit and probably trigger hyperinflation.
His whole strategy could really be boiled down to this: immediate pain for future stability. It was a tough pill to swallow, for sure, but Monroe's goal wasn't just to make the pain go away overnight. It was to prevent national bankruptcy and build a credible, trustworthy financial reputation for the United States on the world stage. And it's this disciplined, financially focused mindset that gives us a completely new lens to look at his most famous policy.
So here it is again, the definition we all had to memorize in school: a geopolitical warning shot to the old powers of Europe. But what if that wasn't its only purpose? What if it wasn't even the main purpose?
Because when you look closer, you see the Monroe Doctrine was also a brilliant economic maneuver. By protecting these brand new republics in Latin America, the U.S. was ensuring that massive new markets would be open to American goods not locked down by old European colonial trade rules. It was, in effect, a declaration of economic independence for the entire hemisphere.
You see, this was pragmatism disguised as ideology. Monroe understood that political power and economic power were really two sides of the same coin. Securing the hemisphere politically meant securing it for American commerce. So when you put all of these pieces together, a very different picture of President Monroe starts to emerge. He wasn't just a diplomat, he was a quiet financial architect.
The transformation during his presidency was just stark. He inherited a nation teetering on the edge of financial ruin, crushing debt, a chaotic banking system, trade dominated by Europe.
He left office having slashed that debt, stabilized the financial system, and opened up an entire hemisphere of new commercial opportunities.
Think about this for a moment. In the middle of a massive financial panic, when most governments would be spending wildly, his administration cut the national debt by over 25%. That is the definition of fiscal discipline.
Perhaps his mentor, Thomas Jefferson, understood him best. This reputation for unwavering integrity wasn't just about his character. It was the very bedrock of his financial policy. Time and again, he made the hard, honest choice, not the easy, popular one.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question. We remember Monroe for his bold declaration to the world. But maybe his true, lasting legacy was something much quieter. The difficult, unpopular, and absolutely essential work of building a financial foundation strong enough for a nation and its doctrine to stand on.